I am 𝓒𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 and welcome to Jahil Classes 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. In this video, I'll explain the theme 7 of class 11th history from the section 3rd, that is changing traditions. The theme or the chapter that we have got for this video is changing cultural traditions. So changing cultural traditions. As in the last chapter or the theme, we talked about the three orders in which we saw clergy, the nobility and all the common people in one order. We have seen that they were categorized in different orders. That was termed as the medieval era or the medieval ages, or you could say these terms were given to them. In this chapter, we will see that how things changed in Italy and spread all over the Europe. How the changes were in the mindset of the people in the society. Now, individuals saw them, and instinct urban culture came up in which people saw themselves as more civilized compared to the Roman people. So how did that happen? There was a shift in the scientific view of people as well. New scientific theories came up by different scientists that overturned the European theories, such as that European centric view, that is Mediterranean Sea was the center of the earth, or the earth centric view by which earth was the center of the solar system and all the other celestial body was moving around it, you could say, was the theory of the people, mindset of the people. But how that changed by the scientific views, scientific theories, we will see that in this chapter. Some of the sources include the documents, the texts, the buildings, sculptures and many paintings, you could say, that have been found in Europe, have been preserved or kept in the archives, art galleries and in the museums of America and Europe. You know what, that by the 19th century a term humanism or humanist was used by the historians. The main insistence of this term was by a Swiss scholar, that was 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. Now this scholar was a student of Leonhard von Ranke. And you could say that this scholar, Mr. Jacob, was a student at University of Basel in Switzerland. He had graduated from there. He had been taught by his, you could say, teacher. Von Ranke had taught him that the main concern of the historian should be the political history that has to be written under the files and paper of the government documents. He was not satisfied with what his teacher had taught him. He was thinking that culture and tradition were equally important, as much as important as the political history was. That is why in 1860 he wrote a book in which he showed a new term, humanism, and how important cultural and traditional history was. Culture was as much as important as politics. His view of, you could say that his view was that they should all be equal, not just political or those things should be there. Paintings matter, cultural matter, and those things matter as well. The term medieval era was there. In the modern era, the people or a person was more capable, was seemed to be more capable than a person in the medieval era. And in this chapter we will see also about the dark ages and how the things go on. So let's start the chapter without any further ado with the first topic, that is the revival of Italian cities. So the revival of Italian cities, as we had seen that the Roman Empire had fallen out by the 642 CE. This caused Western Rome to be ruled by the different tribes of different parts of Europe. The Eastern Rome was still ruled by Byzantine Empire, due to which Italy by now was very weak and fragmented. It was shattered into pieces. In Western Rome, let's leave it about, because now feudal lords, the feudal bonds were being established there, and the three order that we talked about was being established there. In contrast, in Eastern Rome, what was going on was that there was Islamic Empire, as we talked about. Now, this Islamic Empire had trade with different empires, for which Italian ports were important for that continuation of those trades, you could say. for which the coastal ports, coastal cities were important. The Italian cities such as Florence, Venice and Genoa, those cities came into being a bit by bit. Very little these trade helped him that they grew up in such big things. What happened was exactly that, as we have seen that Mongols had opened up the trade routes via China, the Silk routes. So because of that, Italian cities were emerging. Even if it was bit by bit, it was still increasing compared to the Western Rome that was being established as popes were coming up and all other things were going on. Venice and Florence were the cities of Italy that were important because they were republics. They were not ruled by any other political party or so and so you could say. What happened that there are two cities in Italy that are Venice and Genoa. Venice and Genoa were different from any other European states at that time because there neither the clergy nor the nobility was important or dominant. So who will be dominant there? Of course, the fourth order that was seemed to be, we had seen in the last chapter, all the new aristocracy that was coming up, middle classes, the businessmen and all other professionals that came up were ruling there. Even when military despots were ruling over them, the citizens did not lose the feeling of being a citizen. This feeling did not weaken. So that is how the revival of the Italian cities took place during that time. Now the next topic here is universities and humanism. So universities and humanism. The earliest universities of Europe had been set up in Italy. Those include particularly the University of Padua and that of Bologna. These two were the earliest cities, earliest universities, not the cities. Now, by the time, at that time after medieval India, what was going was that law was the main focus of the people. Law subject were the main focus of the people because during that time there was a high demand of lawyers and notaries that are solicitor as well and a record keeper to interpret the laws and the term agreements on which the large scale trade was possible. Because without these things, you know what, for any large scale trade, what was important, the interpretation of the laws, how the law was interpreted by different lawyers or different people. That was also very important, and agreements are the must thing in these trades, as all of you know. So it was very important for these professionals to come up, and commerce being the chief main activity of Europe during that time, law was the main subject in the universities. The emphasis could be seen by Francesco Petrarch to shift this you could say law subject to different subjects such as you could say art and culture, that we need to see different things as well, paintings, different sculpture and many other things. To Petrarch, what was important that antiquity could be interpreted only by the actual words of Greeks and Romans, for which the earliest works of earliest authors of you could say Greek or Romans was very important to be read by different scholars. For him, it was important, you know what, by this emphasis, the term humanism came up. The humanist term came up. Humanist, you could say, was for a professor or for any teacher who could teach you grammar, rhetoric, moral philosophy, history and culture as well. Grammar was important because it was the rules and regulation. Hindi grammar, English grammar, we have these grammar as the rules and regulations for that particular subject. So it was very important for that grammar as well. Humanities mainly meant that. Apart from that, humanitas, that is the origin word for humanities. Now you must know what humanities is. If you are watching this video, then of course you have chosen this subject in 11th. So humanitas is the origin of humanities word. This Latin word humanitas has been used centuries ago by an essayist and a lawyer, that is Cicero, who was a contemporary of Julius Caesar, to mean culture. So humanitas literally meant culture. So we could say that a shift could be seen from not just in universities of Padua and Genoa, but in other universities as well, in other cities or in any other places, such as the hometown of Petrarch's own, that was Florence. In Florence, that was very weak city, that was, you could say, after the fall of the Roman Empire, it was very weak city. it was fragmented and had not much left with value or importance. For any city, what was important? That its wealth matters the most, as well as citizens matter the most as well. If wealth is important and as equally is important the citizens, that same happened in this area, in this city. This Florence by the 15th century dramatically had a change because of its citizens. Two of them mainly being Giotto, who was making lifelike portraits different from the stiff-like figures done in medieval ages, and Dante Alighieri. This person was writing on religious themes. Now this religious theme is different. You know what? That this is not the same as in medieval ages. It was different. It was according to antiquity, the ancient Greek, the ancient Roman culture it was based on. Apart from that, during that time, people were now combined in one, like they had broadened their horizon, not just in one subject, not just in their religion. They were now broadening their horizon, such as you could say humanist person, humanist man, Renaissance man was a term. Renaissance man was a term used for a person who was diplomat, theologian, artist and sculptor combined in one. So there were many, like they had not just particular subject or particular field, they had broadened their horizon. Now the next topic here we have is the humanist view of history. So the humanist view of history. Now, as we have talked about a lot about humanists and humanism, but what about their view on history? They had a complete different view on history as you have. According to them, they were now starting the true era, the true age, you will say, the true ages had been started up after the medieval era. You know what, that according to them, after the millennium, there is a term dark ages used by them for the millennium after the fall of Roman Empire. Millennium means centuries, you could say centuries, that means 100 years. So many 100 years after, they had to use this term dark ages for the medieval era. According to them, according to the humanists, the timeline of history has been something like this. From 5th to 14th century, they have termed this as the Middle Ages, in which 5th to 9th century has been termed as the Dark Ages. The 9th to 11th has been termed as the early Middle Ages. The 11th to 14th has been termed as the late Middle Ages, and 15th century onwards it has been termed as the modern ages, in which person saw himself more than just being controlled by a church. Because according to the humanist, what was happening that after the fall of the Roman Empire, the church had control over the mindset of the people, over the minds of all the people. That is why they had termed it as the Dark Ages. And now what happened that all the historians unquestioningly assumed this as Dark Ages, but recently many historians have come up whether this should be or not, because this seems unfair to term any age as Dark Ages. We'll come on to that in the last section of this chapter. Now the next topic here is science and philosophy, the Arabs' contribution. So the science and philosophy, the Arabs' contribution. In the medieval ages, there were many scholars who had that ancient texts or the ancient texts written by Greeks or Romans had been within the clergymen and the monks, who had not made these popular or widely known to all the people of Europe or of Italy. It was only in the 15th century, after 15th century, that many scholars got to read the translated work of these ancient texts, for which they were not grateful to their own scholars, but were indebted to Arabian translators, because these Arab translators had translated the ancient work into different languages. For them, you know that the work of Plato and Aristotle were very important, that had been translated, because if they were not, then not many people know about it. And if you have read now, for example, if there are 10 people and one is only knowing this particular thing, now he can misinterpret it by saying that this means that or this means that, until and unless you read it and you understand it. So that happened at that time as well. Now scholars were reading that Plato's work, Aristotle's works. Plato was Aflatun and Aristotle was Aristo, an Arabic translation. There is one more thing that now many scholars had even more translated these translations by Persians and Arabs, so as to increase the spreadings more and more among the Europeans to other Europeans. These included the work of natural sciences, astronomy, medicines, and many other things. There were many Muslims that had been, you could say, Muslim men of wisdom that had been recognized by the Europeans or Italians. In Italian work, you can find many other Islamic people who are considered as the men of wisdom as well. For example, we have Avicenna, or we have Ibn Rushd, that was you could say that is known as Rhazes. You know what, that you can find different names. His real Muslim name would be different and the Latin name would be different. So there was Ibn Sid. This was Avicenna in Latin, who was from Bukhara region in Central Asia and was a great philosopher. After that, we have Al-Rhazes, that was known as Rhazes in Latin, who had been, you could say, he was also a great philosopher and mainly had written a medical encyclopedia. So for that he was recognized. Apart from that, we have scholars from Spain as well, like Ibn Rushd, that was, you could say that was recognized for his work for resolving the tensions between the medical philosophy, other philosophy, and religious beliefs. During that time, it was important as well. So you could say that was what was going on in that era. There were many works. If we have to find any connection with Arab translation, we have seen that in Ptolemy's Amagist, that is an astronomy work in 140 CE by a writer, of course, that was Ptolemy's. So this work was translated by Arabs, and an article Al was seen. So Al defines you could say a relationship with the Arabs. For example, you might have heard about or studied about, of course, in maths, algebra. So this algebra word has a connection with Arabs because it contains al. That means it has a relationship with Arabs. So it might have something to do with Arabs if you had to find it about it. So that was contribution of Arabs to philosophy. What about science? There was a contribution of science as well. Like we have seen, the work of Aristotle was important for science as well, and many other works were translated by the Arabs. These were more even useful for people if they were there for them as translated works. Even though in universities law, medicine, and theology continued to be dominant, these were also spreading in many parts of the world. Now the next topic here that we have got is artists and realism. So artists and realism. You know what, that only the formal education, that is writing, speaking, learning, was not the only way that humanists used for spreading their views. There were many other things like arts and you could say art and architecture, cultural things, painting, sculptures, that were also used for spreading their views. In the modern ages, many artists, sculptors, not artists, the sculptors came up. You know what, the text, as much as important as the text was, there was a great excitement for the remains of sculptures, you know, that sculpture of the ancient Greek times. So in deserted cities of Italy, or in the Rome area of city, you could say Roman city of Italy, what could we find was the ruins or the fragmented parts of sculpture of different, you could say sculpture, you could say different portraits or something like statue could be found in that modern era. That was filled with excitement if they could find, if any of the sculptor could find these fragmented ruins or parts, he would be so excited. So that was the thing that happened. Many artists came up to sculpture to do the sculpture work for making sculpture, you could say making statues or portraits of different people. That was not as same as the medieval era, but was according to antiquity, according to ancient Greek and Roman culture. For this, you know what, that there was an importance of laboratories, medical science as well. For painting or for making any statue, what you need is that you need to have a very good knowledge of the human structure, human body knowledge, and the structure of bones as well. That is why many sculptors had gone to laboratories for studying the human structure, how the body was formed, because if you don't know the body of an animal or any person or any human being, how could you form it? You need to study that as well. Then only you can make the shapes of waist, hands. What if you don't know any knowledge of human beings, then what will you make? You will make hands so fat, waist very slim, thin, so that would not be a correct statue. For this you need to have a knowledge of bone structure and human body as well. For this, there is Andreas Valisor, who first dissected the human body, leading to the modern physiology, not theology, but modern physiology. So in short, it could be seen that it was very important. Now many sculptures came up for making statues of different, they were lifelike portraits. They were seeing Roman work as proportionally perfectly proportioned men and women, like they were perfectly made by the Romans and Greeks according to them. Apart from that, we have painters as well, like artists. For them, there was no work, there was no earliest works of Greeks and Romans left for them. They could not find any fragmented things or ruins, or like statues we do find, but paintings were very hard to be found. But what helped them was that they were also dependent on science. They had seen that geometry helped them to make the paintings, to make the face structure, because geometry was very important, and adjusting the light was also very important. That was giving them a three-dimensional painting, three-dimensional view of the painting. And you know that oil that we use as a medium in paintings makes the painting colors more vibrant and bright. So these little things bit by bit helped those painters as well. What was common was that they were now in modern ages dependent on different theories by different people. So now they were more in a scientific view of field, leading to the emergence and opening of that grand Greek and Roman culture, Roman history, you could say. Those works, that was realism. It was seen as realistic ways. Both the sculptors, artists were making their work as much as possible, as much realistic as possible. So that there is the term realism, that means realistic views, realistic works, realistic things. So that term was being used by people for those people. Now let's get on to the next topic, that is architecture. So architecture, the Roman city, or you could say Italy, the Rome grew up in a spectacular way by the 15th century or in 15th century. What happened that in 1417, the Pope of Rome had grown into so much power, because now the political tension that had been because of the election of two rival popes by the 1378 had ended, that made the Pope powerful. This led him to make excavations of earlier ruins and fragments of you could say Roman culture, Roman buildings, Roman texts, and all other things. So archaeologists were hired to excavate older Roman buildings and sculptures, statues, and many other things. Archaeology was a new skill at that time. This led to building of a new architecture in Rome, particularly that was a revival of the imperial architecture of the Roman city that was now called as classical. The popes, aristocrats, big merchants had hired the archaeologists and architects all over the world who were familiar with the classical design, and they were hired to work on the buildings, to build the buildings, not just work on the buildings. Artists and sculptors were hired to work on that building, to make sculptures, make paintings, and make it more and more beautiful. One of the most important painters at that time was Leonardo da Vinci. who also painted the most popular, I think, you also know about it, that is Mona Lisa. So this painting was also painted by him, and there are many other works of him that are quite admirable. So you could say that during that time he was also one of the important figures. Apart from that, many architects, many artists, sculptors were hired to do this new classical way of grow up in Roman city. What happened that during that time there were many citizen individuals who were equally as important, as skilled as artists and sculptors were. There were many examples like Michelangelo Buonarroti. This person who made the famous sculpture the Pieta, in which Mary was holding the dead body of Jesus Christ. So this painting, the sculpture was spread all over the world, like it's things spread all over the world, and it is still very famous sculpture. So that time it was very important, and apart from him there are many sculptures and many other people who have made such good things. So during that time, in short, in nutshell, what you can say is that artists came to be known by their name, not by their group or in which guild they were, but their talent was being recognized. They were now seen as individuals, not by their group, caste or guild. Nothing like that came up, and that was the way how Roman city came up in the ways of architecture. Architecture grew up in so many ways in Rome. The next topic here that we have got is the first printed books. So the first printed books. What happened in the Roman city, like in Italy? What was going on during that time was that all the sculptures, sculpture or statues, paintings, all people from the world had to come in Italy to see that piece of work. But the words written on books or texts spread from Italy to the people all over the world. People did not have to come in Italy to read those books or texts or documents, but these words spread to them. That was mainly because of the main revolution in the printing technology in the 15th century. Due to this technology, many things happened in Italy. Italians were indebted to many other people such as the Chinese and Persian. The Chinese mainly because they had invented the printed technology at first. Printing came into being from China. It is a different thing that technology came up in Europe, but printing came up in China. They were also indebted to Mongols, who were very important, who had a great importance in spreading these technologies all over the world. The Italians had seen this kind of technology in the courts when they went to visit Mongolians. So that was another thing that happened. Apart from that, there is a German who is known as Johannes Gutenberg, who might you have heard about it. In 1455, in his shop, 150 copies of Bibles were copied in Latin, of course, in Latin language. The same amount of time could be taken by a monk to copy one copy of Bible, and in the same amount of time he had made 150 copies of the Bible. That was a great achievement for the mankind. Many books, many printed texts, many books were now being printed due to this printed technology that spread all over the world. New information, new ideas, opinions, beliefs, thoughts of the people came into being and were spreading all over the world. This could have the reader's opinion as well, reader's attention it was getting. Now a person or an individual could get book, as it was very easy to buy the books. By the 15th century, it was very popular that books were being read by the people all over the Europe. They were reading, because now there was no shortage of those books. For one book, there were 100 readers that came up. Students were now not just dependent on the short note lectures, but now they could read books and had study or all those stuffs. So printed technology was a great achievement for spreading these humanist views as well, because with books it was very easy at that time, and was very essential, important thing as well to spread the views, and that was also one of the great achievements during that time. So that is how the first printed books came into being. Now the next topic here is a new concept of human beings. So a new concept of human beings. You know what, that in the modern age, in the humanist era, or when there were many humanists, what happened, a new concept of human beings came up. Now a man was not relating himself to religious beliefs or his religion, his or her religion, but now he was seeing himself as an individual. He was free to do what he wants to do. One of the most important thing here was that crucial things, you could say, that people were now known by their name, what they did work on, not by their group or the guild. They were also not humanists, like they were believing in different kind of technologies, new views, new beliefs, but that did not mean that they were necessarily irreligious. They were religious, but their way of thinking was different. Their religion things was different, their religious things were different, that they had to interpret the earliest. Like if you're in Christianity, you have to get the right meaning of the Bible, not just by what had been interpreted by the clergies or the monks. So that was also very important. So a new concept of the human beings came up. In many of the books, like on pleasure, you can find that wealth only was not important. You can just get pleasure from the wealth or glory. You need to have some other things as well, some beliefs or opinions or thoughts. That was also, see, living a life is different, and living a life with dignity is just different. You can get whatever you want, because having wealth or having fame or having dignity, what is the most important thing? You choose for yourself. Now the next topic here is the aspirations of women. So the aspirations of women. The new individuality and citizenship excluded the women. As all of you know that the gender discrimination or gender inequality has been a very common problem or issue or conflict in many parts of the world from a long era. So there also, what was going on, that there was a discrimination. You know what, in aristocratic families, even though dowries were used in family businesses, women were not allowed to say to husbands how the business should run. Like they had no opinion left. They should not, like according to their husbands, they should have no opinions on how the business should run, even though all money on that business has been from their dowries. Very often these marriages were like an adequate contract of family businesses. Like for example, if there are two families who have great businesses and they want to make a cooperation on a project, so for that they will have a marriage of their son and daughter. So very often these marriages were business contracts or something like that. So in short, what was going on was that in aristocratic families, women had wives or women had a very low, like they had no role in that families. And all the aristocratic families sent their sons, like allowed their elder sons to run their businesses, at the same time sending their sons to the church, and after he will also join in the business. So they will only allow their sons to run their businesses and whatever they had. And if any girl was there whose parents could not afford dowries, like if the dowries were inadequate, the girl would simply be sent to the convents to live the life of a nun. So as all of you can say that this was very much limited to the life of the women. They were not allowed to do any political role, public role. They would not have anything like that. They were dominant by men, like as father-in-law or husbands or something like that. Compared to that, in merchant families, it was still higher. The women still had some role compared to aristocratic families. It was just a different story. In merchant and bankers' family, women did have a role in the businesses. For example, when their husbands went from one city to another city, as they were merchants or bankers, they would be running the shops or whatever the business was. Their role would be higher, like they would have a role in that business as well. They were allowed to do something. There were many intellectual women who had who were sensitive and were intellectual about what was going on in the society. There is a woman, there is Venetian Cassandra Fadele, who said that, who wrote in a book that even though letters, promises and gave us no rewards and dignity, but women ought to embrace and seek for them. Letters as alphabets we have in English, as you can say. So she was one of those handful women who were quite sensitive about what was going on in the society, about the gender discrimination and what should happen for improving the quality of life of the women. She also had some books and many other things. There were also many other Venetian women who also wrote, like this Fadele also wrote in her book that now republic has been made, but this definition of freedom is very much limited to the lives of men having no connection with women that should be there. Another good example of women power empowerment could be of Isabella d'Este. She was the Mantua of Marchesa. When her husband was on some rally or in visit to some other city, she was ruling over there. She was the Marchesa of Mantua for a short period of time that was leading to her reputation. So that you could say that in short they were having some political role or public role. So there were quite a handful of women who were seeking for economic power, public role and their dignity in a world dominated by the men. That was also very important because gender equality is very much important in this world. Even today we have seen that in some parts of the world there is still gender inequality that has to be changed. Is very important for now. Now the next topic is debates within Christianity. So debates within Christianity. Now in the modern age, after the 15th century, there was so much chaos going on in Christianity itself. As all of you know that Italy was attracting many people, many wealthy and educated people by its trade and travel, by its military conquest and by its diplomatic contracts as well. This was imitated by all the wealthy and educated families who wanted to run their business from all over the Europe, because this chapter is mainly concerned with Europe and even in that Italy, Italian cities. So of course we'll be talking about that. In Christianity now new things came up. You know what? A very simple idea of Christian, you could say fathers or churches, Catholic churches, was that they had a very mere concept of sins, that a man is born with sins from his past life or from something like that. He has been born with his sins, and in this life he has to do good deeds by giving money to the churches and by doing very good things. Then only he can travel to heaven, or otherwise or else he would go to the hell. That was a very mere concept, that you have been born with the sins and the man has to be run according to the churches, according what the popes say, according what all the Christian Catholic churches say about it. So that was a very mere concept that was very popular during that time. Now this concept was being contradicted, was being questioned by many other scholars. In North Europe, many scholars came up and were now seeing, they had colleagues who were Italian, and by seeing them they were also seeing the importance of Greek and Roman culture texts, the earliest texts of Greek and Romans. But unlike Italy, what was important here was that in Italy all those who supported it were mainly the scholars, but now in Northern Europe there were many people from church itself who were supporting these ideas, and they came up as well. We have Thomas Mary, Asta Muller in Holland, who are questioning these things, that what is this is self-indulgence. And there is one German that you might know about that is Martin Luther King. He also wrote 95 theses in which he had demands. Now this Martin Luther King said that you should only have the faith in God. A distinct God should be there. That is, the God has made us and has given us the life that to live freely. We have a distant God who has given us the opportunity to live freely whatever we want to do in good deeds. So that was his opinion, and he also brought the Protestant Reformation, according to which now Protestants, you might have heard about it, now this kind of church were opened. How they were, we will also talk about that. Now this Martin Luther King said that you should only have the faith in the real God, the Almighty, you could say, because only faith could provide you the right way to live, the right way to lead your life. There is no need to give money to churches or go something like that, but the only thing is the faith, the real faith in the Almighty or the God. That was his opinion. And you know what, that he was supported in Switzerland by many other people like Ulrich Zwingli and later by Calvin Jean as well. There were also many rebels going on by the peasants. You know what, that backed by merchants, reformers were doing very good in the towns. In rural areas, however, the Catholic churches had retained their influence, were okay with their influence. Their influence was not going on that, was not being questioned or did not have impact with this. What happened that now princes were also seeing that the interference of churches in their political issues, in their way of ruling the country was seemed they were seeing it as irritating, and that is why they were also very happy to know that now their fame is being questioned. Other thing is that they were also happy or quite good with that, in good terms you could say, that now the practices that were being carried on in the Catholic Church were not derived from the actual Bible, but were from the donation of Constantine, written by Constantine, the first Roman Christian emperor. So they were quite happy, the princes were quite happy that they did not have to believe in it. He was merely now people could see the translated Bible and were now saying that these practices were not allowed in the real Bible. They were against the permit given in this Bible that they had been translated into. Apart from that, there were many rebels by the peasants going on. Adding to that, there were many radical ideas coming up in the mind of people. You know what, there are some scholars or so you could say churchmen such as Anabatus and many other who have more and more radicalism, that we have the right to oppress the kings, we have the right to oppress all the we have the right to have our own church person, pope you could say, or we have bishops we could say. We need to have our own. We need not to follow these kind of things. Apart from that, we also don't have to pay these taxes to the king or to any church clergy. So that was his opinion. In contrast, what happened that Martin Luther King did not support this. He wasn't support that we have to need another you could say church, the structure of church should be different, must be different, but he was against the idea of radicalism. He even did not support the rebel going on in 1525 and had been oppressed, had a role in oppressing it as well. So that were the things going on. In France, as in any other part of Europe, there was a new church being called up that was Protestants. We have seen in Christianity there are Protestants, Orthodox churches and Catholic churches. So Protestant came from there, from the protests of all those Martin Luther King and all those. So there were three parties in you could say in total there were three parties. First was the Martin Luther King, who was against radicalism. Second was the radical people. Third were the clergy, the churchmen who we're talking about. Now this church, you know what, allowed Protestants, all the church, the Catholic Church had allowed Martin Luther King that you can worship the God as in the way you want. You can have your own church, you can have just different section in this Christianity. Debates were going on. This was what was going on that time. Apart from that, this Catholic Church itself could not retain itself, or you could say could not prevent itself from the impact of these all debates within Christianity. In Spain, there were many openings of different societies leading to the worship of the God and in the change of the structures of the Catholic churches. So there were many debates within Christianity and many things went on in Christianity. Changes could be seen in this period of time. After that, we have the next topic, that is the Copernican Revolution. So the Copernican Revolution. Now let's talk about some scientific views, point of view about different scientists as well. As I said earlier, that in Europe, many scholars, Christians, believed that Earth was the center of the solar system and all the celestial bodies were moving around it in circles. The second one was that the Mediterranean Sea was the middle of the earth, showing the Europe-centric point of view, could say. But this was also challenged by different scientists. Not challenged, but new theories came up. This could be traced by a scientist, by a person named Copernicus. From 1473 to 1543, he lived. He had, like in his book, he had written that Earth was not the middle or the center of the solar system, but it including the Earth and all the planets were moving around the Sun. He had given the theory of rotation as well. But seeing the possible reaction, he had predicted the possible reactions by the clergyman and traditionalists. That is why he did not publish his work, De Revolutionibus. Now it literally meant the rotation. So when he died in his deathbed, he gave it to his follower. That was, now he published it to the world. It took time for people to accept this idea. To support this, half a century later, there were two more people that came up, and those were, first one, Johannes Kepler, who wrote Cosmographical Mystery, in which he showed that all the planets, including Earth, move around the Sun not in circles but in ellipses. Second was Galileo Galilei. Actually, it's Galileo Galileo. Now this Galileo had written a book, that is The Motion. In this motion, he has explained the dynamic world, the notion of a dynamic world. Supporting his ideas, there are many equations and many other things, experiments. And this was even more revolutionized. That revolution in science came into being by the theory of gravitation given by Sir Isaac Newton. So that made a great revolution. In the starting phase, there were opposition and many clergymen came up, but people were now opening their minds and were seeing the experiments, the theories, you could say that the examples supporting that idea. Because if there is any idea or theory given by these scientists, it has been supported by many examples showing that thing. If you have seen the theory of gravitation, you can find it in many examples. So that now people were now starting to believe it, even though it took a long time for people to believe it. Now the next topic here is reading the universe. So reading the universe. Now that Galileo had clarified it, that now the age has come for the experiments to come up, because now not just believing in religious beliefs was important. Religious belief was different, and what was known as experiment was different. For any theory, if you're saying that Earth is has a sin burden, all people are born with sin, but what is example? What is supporting this? Is there any idea supporting this? Is there anything we can believe on? It is just that's said by those priests or clergymen. That was not supported by any example. It has been seen that the clergymen or Christians were saying that you have to move to heaven if you do these things. But how would we move to heaven? What are the guarantee, or what are the things? So that were questioned by Galileo. He said that belief was different and experiments was different. For experiment was also very important for any work to be done, for any theory to be given to people, or for any work to be as a mindset of the people. If we have any scientific theory, like we have laws of equation, laws of motion, or we have gravity, pressure, these have been supported by many examples, haven't they been? So that was the thing we questioned. in minds of non-believer perspectives, there's another thing that replaced the God, that was nature. For them, nature was a creation for all the beings, and even if they believed in God, they believed in distant God. That is, they would say that the God has made us but has given the whole complete freedom. He has given us the material things and He has just now left us. We have to live our life. So that was a thing that were believed by non-believers of like Christians, non-believer Christians you could say, or the skeptics. There is another thing that during that time many societies or associations were being established. For example, the Royal Society in London, and we have that was established there, and many other societies or you could say universities had been established that were giving the lectures on experiments. You have to do experiments, investigations, and to think about it for a scientific point of view. We have to see, because logic is another thing. We have to see the logic behind it as well. Now, next and last topic of this chapter is, was there a European Renaissance in the 14th century? So, was there a European Renaissance in the 14th century? Renaissance, this word literally means rebirth. As in the starting of chapter, I clarified it that Europeans at this time, you could say historians had termed, 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 has termed this period as Renaissance. Renaissance meaning rebirth. There was a rebirth of all the culture, Greek and Roman culture. But is it really okay to call a period dark age or to call this period a Renaissance? There have been many. Recently, a historian named Peter Burke has questioned this. He has said that 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 has exaggerated all these changes. Like we have seen the changes in religious things and cultures. We have seen that in arts and realism, we saw that sculptures, many statues and paintings were being made. But their origins could be traced in 12th and 13th century as well. It was not that they were the dark ages. It was also in the case of religion. Even though there was a change in the mind of the people, religion still continues to be very significant. It is so because there was not that much change in the modern age. It has been exaggerated by different historians by their perspectives. Even they are correct in their places, but there has to be seen the logic behind it as well. The main change that did happen in this era, in the modern age after 15th century, was that there was a sense of private and public life in the minds of people. Public life included the government role, what you have to do for society. Private is your privacy. You're having your religion as you want to have. Religion is the thing that we are allowed to choose for ourselves. So people were having their private life, including their families, wives, children, and all those things. So there was a concept of public life as well as private life, and every person has some kind of public life in some or other way. Not you can say that a person does not have a role in public life. He or she does have, and it is very essential for a country or for a state as well. So it was like that. All the models, all the paintings, sculptures, statues, cultural beliefs, scientific view were just exaggeration. Even if we are comparing these to the ages of 12th and 13th century, we can't just call them as dark ages, because there also some gloomings were there. Even though there was something like that, three orders, nobility, clergy, but still some things were going on. It is just unfair to call any period dark ages, because everything has its pros and cons. You could say a coin is with the two sides. It's just how we see it, what perspective we have been shown to. It happens in many spheres of life as well. You might have seen that in movies, sometimes you believe this and sometimes you believe that. They are in contrast, just because you have been shown the different perspectives. That what happens in history as well. We have to be neutral in studying the history. So that is all in this chapter. In this chapter we talked about changing cultural tradition, in which we talked about mainly Renaissance. Renaissance is a term that we use for the people, that means rebirth, that was used, but that seems to be exaggeration or oversimplification of the medieval ages that happened. So in this chapter we talked a lot of different spheres, not just one particular sphere. We talked about religion, that is Christianity of course, and we also saw one other thing was that in this chapter, the main was that the European had so much technology, but that was not the mere thing. Even if there was a change in technology, the other things were also there. In Asia, we also had developments further than that. Like navigation was being used for sailing further and further. Europeans had derived many things from Asia, particularly from India, China, and these technologies had connected Asia and South Africa, you could say, to Europe. But just because when we read the history, it is mainly focused to the European point of view, European centric view, that is why we just leave it. It took a long time for historians to believe that from India, from China, from South Africa, from other countries, there were also derivations by different people of Europe, but it just takes a lot of time. So basically in this chapter we covered all the spheres, cultural, culture with tradition we had, paintings, sculptures, statues. We also talked about science and religion, and that was all in this chapter we talked about. There were a lot of things that happened in Europe, particularly in Italy, that its revival was possible, and many other things changed it. So this is all for this video. So this is all I have covered in this chapter. I have covered all the topics and subtopics, and the next themes of this book will be covered in the further upcoming videos. So stay tuned for the upcoming videos. Thank you very much.